Okay, so this question, and we can go to everyone on the panel with it. What is your position regarding fracking to get natural gas? Easy question to start with. Robert's not here. I think he would have been the first one to perhaps answer that, but put you on the spot, guys. But maybe we'll start with Patrick, since you're on the far side there.
Yeah, it's an issue that I haven't actually studied very closely, but my understanding is that the key problem, or at least one key problem, is the water pollution that occurs as a result of all the water that needs to be used. And I've heard that it could be done in a way that's less polluting, but I don't know what that way is. So I guess I'm rather ignorant. I'm a little worried about the whole process, but at the same time, I'm really happy that natural gas is, helping us solve the climate mitigation problem, as we heard in the first talk today, the first two talks actually. So I'm not sure. Would you guys have any views on it?
Let's go to Aislinn. Is there fracking going on in Massachusetts?
No, there's no fracking going on in Massachusetts. I know there are some concerns. I know there's a lot of concerns about fracking, and I myself haven't studied it in depth either, but there are clearly, concerns about water pollution, et cetera. And we are hearing from stakeholders too who have some concern about, expanding natural gas and in Massachusetts, and will that, how do we control whether we bring in more fracking gas or not? So I know it's certainly a concern. We recognize that while natural gas has its benefits right now and where we're at, that long term we really do want to move away from fossil fuels. We rely on natural gas a lot right now, but we're really hoping that we can push more in the renewables and gradually reduce our use of gas overall over time.
Good, thanks.
I would say,
Joan?
as opposed to what? Better than coal, but we definitely need to work on the water pollution and other polluting elements. It needs to be much more highly regulated. But it's part of a transitional path. I mean, Robert's presentation talked about amazing game changer technologies, but we're not here yet. And so what is that pathway that gets us from coal to those renewables? Well, it's probably going to be natural gas and nuclear. And so in that respect, I think we need to work on it, but we need it.
Thanks, Joe. There's a question from Charlotte Kahn.
Hi, I think this is for Joan. I don't think you were here yesterday, but we heard
I was.
Oh, you were? So
Yeah.
we heard from the MWRA, and
Yes.
we heard from a lot of public agencies about the level of challenge that we face. I mean, basically, if we have a 7.5 foot, whether it's a storm surge as in a hurricane this summer or sea level rise plus surge or whatever, our transit system is down, the innovation district is underwater, a lot of the airport is underwater, Kendall Square where we are is underwater. Basically our innovation economy is literally underwater, and we can't get out. Now, how do we, there doesn't seem to be any level of urgency about this. The Globe doesn't have a reporter here or covering this generally. We're developing these systems and models as if there's no urgency, but we could be up a creek this summer if a hurricane hit. How do you think we can build on the good work that's going on in planning to create a sense of urgency so that people understand that it could be like New York or much worse here?
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Why don't we start with Joan on that, unless, I don't know if you directed that to somebody specific, but why don't we just go down the row, because actually I think one of the techniques that could be used is things like a report card to get us focused on stuff like that. So, Joan, why don't you start?
I think the idea of the report card that we're developing is to help establish some sense of urgency. We have a tendency to think we're really doing good work in Boston, and we are. but that doesn't mean it's up to the task of what needs to be done. And the other aspect of the Building Resilient Boston partnership is that we're bringing together developers as well as the construction community. Because when we brought them together, the construction people are saying, we're just going full steam ahead, building in the Innovation District, building all over. We know what we're doing isn't best practice. How do we get there? What are the regulations and zoning that the city needs to put in place? So our hope is that by creating this public-private partnership, we can help put pressures on both ends to move the agenda forward faster.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Ethan?
One thing I just wanted to highlight, and it's come up in a number of conversations and stakeholder meetings recently that I've been involved in, is the need for more communication and outreach and education. There are certain groups of people who are engaged and you know, in terms of the sense of urgency, are getting more action at a quicker pace. Maybe that's something that's worth thinking about and focusing on. Just to add one thing at the state level, I'd mentioned earlier about the work that the funding that's been available, and hopefully that this will continue, and our adaptation and resilience planning at the state level. There'll be some opportunities there to support projects. But in terms of reviewing, one of the things that's going on through the MEPA process right now, I mentioned earlier the policy on greenhouse gas emission reductions, but also looking at developing a protocol for environmental review of projects in coastal areas and looking at sea level rise impacts and mitigation that would be needed in projects in coastal areas. So that's kind of one thing that's underway, and there's going to be a stakeholder process on that. Doesn't cover everything. I know it's a select group of projects, but just wanted to mention it.
I'd love to hear from Patrick on this, just because you're from New York, and are things more urgent, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that the point that's made by the New York situation is that it often takes an extreme event to really get people's attention. Mm-hmm. So that's the unfortunate, probably best answer for the question is that, there has to be a bad event here, and then people will really start to take it seriously. But I think short of that, building on what you just said, I think taking the scientific results that are coming from scenarios of storm surge and mapping of flood zones and worst case kinds of things, turning those into communication tools that get out into the broad public, through media, both like pictures, brochures, and other kinds of media, potentially could get people's attention. But ultimately, it's an event that really does it.
Did we have one other question up here?
Mary Jo, this is Bud Riss. Maybe I can
Hey,
help
Bud.
answer this one, because I've been very involved in a lot of the preparedness activities in Boston, and then I also have a question back for Patrick, if I may. I think there's a pecking order of things to do on this whole resiliency preparedness question. Number one, obviously, is to make sure we have good emergency response system in place. And there, if the big flood comes, before we have time to do anything else. And I think there's a big gap right now in educating the public about how to get out of town, how to recover quickly, and, all those kinds of things. There's a big gap right now. I think the second priority is make sure any new building that happens is done properly, and I think that's what Joan was talking about, and I think we're a little bit behind there in the Innovation District and elsewhere. I think the third priority is then to tackle existing buildings. How do you retrofit them over the longer term to make them more resilient? And then the fourth priority is how do you really plan for the long term for those much bigger changes in sea level rise, and how do we defend the city in both natural ways and structural ways. So I hope that's helpful on that answer. My question for Patrick, without in any way diminishing 800 deaths a year, can you put that into context in Manhattan and New York City? Climate change related deaths, as you talked about, from air pollution and so on, how does that compare to other causes of mortality in New York on an annual basis?
That's a good question. I think if you look at different causes of death related to climate, the heat-related impacts are by far the most prominent on a national basis. If you look over the last 30 years or so, heat-related mortality is the one climate-related death risk that dominates all the other things, tornadoes, hurricanes, et cetera. But that doesn't really answer your question, which is how does it compare to other causes of death in New York City? I guess I don't have the death statistics for New York City in my head, and as to what fraction that is. It's a small fraction of all the deaths for sure. It's a very small fraction of all the deaths. People and what heat does and what any other environmental risk factor does is it increases the risk of death that are already there. So people are dying all the time, but when it's hotter, a few more people die, so that the risk goes up by 3% on a day when it's really hot or something like that. So, it's a small percentage increase in the great scheme, but in terms of climate-related risks, it's a big one. And if we want to try to be thinking about public health impacts of climate change, we need to focus on try to prioritize what are the climate risks that are going to be most important from a health point of view, in my view.
All right, Joan, this question is for you. You touched on this a bit, but could you expand on a little bit on the methods and challenges of starting eco-districts in largely built-out cities like we have in New England? And could you also give the name of the report on sustainability analysis? There's someone in the audience that wants to know the name of your report as well.
Okay, I could back up to
Okay.
that. It's just called the district sustainability scan. And again, if you just email me, I'm happy to send a PDF of that
Okay.
report to
All right,
anyone.
so on eco-districts in New England.
Yeah, I think both Portland and San Francisco have been very innovative in looking at ways to develop eco-districts in existing areas. In fact, San Francisco has led a 4-level classification. And one of them they call the blank slate, which is the Hammarby Sjöstad, the Western Harbor. The other they call the patchwork quilt. And that's for the most part what we're dealing with in many US cities, where you take an area, define it by so many city blocks or an existing neighborhood in a city, and then think about what are the elements that we would want to develop here. And it varies in different areas. It could be stormwater management, it could be energy efficiency, but trying to link them all. For some of it, it's affordable housing. So how do you develop green affordable housing? And the report gives examples of ways that San Francisco has used each of these kind. In Portland, what they've defined is 5 different eco-districts that aren't contiguous, but representing different kinds of areas. One is a commercial district, one is a low-income neighborhood. And what they're trying to do is that kind of experimentation to see what are the challenges in each type of area of developing that. Boston has 2. One is in Roxbury, and one is the Innovation District. So again, 2 very different kinds of neighborhoods. How can you apply these comprehensive principles?
So just an extension on that, and maybe Aisling wants to get involved in this too. Are there challenges, though, that of building these with the state building code?
Well, that varies considerably by state. So for example,
So I think they mean Massachusetts.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, Boston, for example, has adopted the stretch code. And so, they're already building to a high level of efficiency. Just to move it beyond Massachusetts, in many states, cities are not allowed to build to a higher standard than their state's building code. And so that presents a big barrier to being able to do it.
All right, okay. Do you have anything to add?
No,
Okay.
as far as the eco-districts, I think at the state level, I would think that the systems that we have in place would want to encourage eco-districts, both on the energy efficiency, the stormwater, et cetera. I'm not thinking off the top of my head of any barriers other
Okay.
than maybe some potential zoning issues that maybe the zoning reform could help.
Okay, so we're going to take one more question, and we're going to go right here.
Yeah, just a quick question. Default mechanism for planning and building permit issuance is oftentimes the state building code. We've heard a lot about freeboard limitations yesterday. Just wondering on the progress, and I know EOEA talked a little bit about advancing the mass building code. Where do we stand with that, and when can we expect better standards for freeboard and for power overall?
I can maybe answer that too, partially to a small degree, but not maybe your whole question. As far as the building code, I know we're adopting the latest international code, but our own stretch code which is important for the green communities and others who want to push that 20% beyond code for energy efficiency, will now be at the same level. So we need a new stretch code. There isn't a timeline for that right now, but it's certainly something that that we want to work on. As far as the freeboard standards in the codes, I can't answer that right now, but I can certainly direct you to somebody at our office that would be able to.
Okay, so we want to have enough time for a break before the next segment. So with that, will you please join me in thanking our panelists?